the blood was still warm. That was the first thing that hit her. Not the cold, though the wind off Lake Michigan was the kind that didn't just bite, it consumed, stripping heat from exposed skin in seconds, turning breath into frozen clouds that vanished before they could drift. Not the silence either, though the blizzard had buried Chicago under 3 feet of packed white nothing, muffling the city into an eerie, suffocating hush that felt less like peace and more like a held breath before a scream. No. It was the blood. Vivid, arterial. Recent. A trail of it carved through the pristine white drifts leading up to the porch of Serafina Mancuso's narrow brick townhouse on Greenleaf Avenue in Evanston, a quiet street that had, until this moment, been quietly, stubbornly ordinary. Serafina saw it the instant her headlights swung into the driveway. She was 28 years old, an emergency room trauma nurse at Northwestern Memorial, 15 hours into what was supposed to be a 12-hour double shift, and so exhausted her hands were still trembling slightly from the adrenaline crash of coding a 40-year-old father of 3 who hadn't made it. Her dark curls were knotted under a wool beanie. Her cheeks were raw. Her scrubs were still faintly stained at the sleeve where the gloves hadn't been quite enough, and the only thing her body wanted, the only thing, was her couch, her blanket, and 6 uninterrupted hours of unconsciousness. Instead, she got a blood trail. She killed the engine. Sat completely still for 4 seconds. Protocol. Her ER supervisor's voice lived permanently in the back of her skull like a tenant she couldn't evict. Assess before you engage. You cannot help anyone if you become the victim. She assessed. The blood trail began at the curb, violent, wide splatter, the kind that suggested movement under pressure, and narrowed into a drag pattern as it climbed the 3 front steps to her porch. The streetlight above was flickering, strobing weakly against the driving snow. The shadows it cast were long and irregular and deeply wrong. One of them was a man. He was sprawled across the bottom step, half buried by the accumulation, one arm folded beneath him and the other outstretched like he'd been reaching for the door handle and simply stopped. He wore a charcoal overcoat, expensive, she registered in that detached clinical way her brain catalogued everything, and it was shredded at the left side, where something had torn through the fabric with the particular violence of ballistic entry. Serafina grabbed her trauma bag from the back seat. She didn't decide to. Her hands just moved. She was out of the car, boots crunching through the iced-over crust of snow, moving fast and low. She dropped to her knees beside him, snow soaking through her scrub pants instantly, and pressed 2 fingers hard against his carotid. Pulse. Weak, thready, too fast. Compensatory shock. Hey. She grabbed his shoulder, turned his face toward her. Can you hear me? I need you to open your eyes. His eyes opened. They were a pale, almost colorless gray, the kind of gray that wasn't cold exactly, but wasn't warm either. The kind of gray that simply evaluated. Even half-conscious, even bleeding out in a blizzard, the man's gaze moved across her face with the systematic precision of someone running calculations she couldn't see. And then his hand moved. He was faster than a dying man had any right to be. His fingers locked around her wrist with a grip so crushing her breath hissed out of her through her teeth. Ospedale, he rasped. The word was Italian, automatic, as if English required effort he no longer had. His chest was heaving. No hospital. I'm calling an ambulance, Serafina said, her voice the same controlled, low-register calm she used on combative trauma patients. She didn't pull against his grip. She'd learned that much. You need a surgeon. No. One word. Absolute. The overcoat shifted. A Kimber 1911, matte black, custom engraved along the slide with something she couldn't read in the dark, slid from his coat pocket and rested against his thigh. He didn't lift it. Didn't aim it. Didn't need to. The snow kept falling. Soft. Indifferent. I'm a nurse, Serafina said carefully. His eyes, still that unnerving, calculating gray, focused on her face with sudden, complete intensity. As if her words had landed somewhere underneath the blood loss and the cold and the shock and located something functional. Bene, he breathed. Good. And then he was unconscious. She stared at him for exactly 2 seconds. Then she grabbed him by the lapels of his ruined coat and pulled. He weighed every pound of what she later estimated was 210 pounds of dense, uncooperative muscle, and dragging him up 3 icy concrete steps while the wind tried to knock her over was the hardest physical thing Serafina Mancuso had ever done in her life. Her boots kept slipping. Her lower back screamed. The trauma bag swung and caught her in the hip hard enough to bruise. She gritted her teeth and pulled, inch by brutal inch, until she had him over the threshold and could kick the front door shut with her heel. The silence was sudden. The warmth hit her face like a gentle slap. She threw the deadbolt. Stood there for 1 breath, 2, her hands braced on her knees, lungs burning. Then she looked at the man bleeding onto her hardwood floor and pulled on a pair of trauma gloves. Her hands stopped shaking. This was what she was built for. She moved his coat and shirt, trauma shears, clean cuts, efficient, and stopped. Not at the gunshot wound, though the through-and-through entry at his left flank was serious enough, nicked artery, significant blood loss, early signs of contamination. Not even at the old scars layered across his torso like a map of survived catastrophes. She stopped at the tattoo. It covered his entire left pectoral and swept up over his shoulder in extraordinary, dense black ink, a crowned wolf, its teeth locked around the throat of a coiled serpent. The wolf's crown was made of thorns. The serpent's eye was a single, precise red ruby inked so carefully it almost seemed to catch the lamplight. Serafina had treated gang members, cartel couriers, dead enforcers. She knew ink. She had never seen this symbol on a living body before. She had seen it exactly once, in an investigative feature in the Tribune about organized crime on the Great Lakes. A throwaway paragraph about the Costello Syndicate, which controlled the underground shipping network through the Port of Chicago, operated across 4 states, and had allegedly laundered more money through legitimate import businesses in 18 months than the city's entire annual infrastructure budget. The Costellos were not street-level. They were not flashy. They did not shoot people in parking lots over turf disputes. They were institutional. Embedded. Invisible. Until apparently one of them was bleeding on her rug. "Madonna," Serafina whispered. Then she opened the quick-clot package and got to work. She packed the wound without anesthesia because she had none that was appropriate, and the man arched off the floor with a sound she felt in her sternum, low, primal, completely involuntary, but he didn't wake. She secured pressure bandages with practiced efficiency, hung a makeshift fluid line from a hook on her bookshelf using a bag of saline from her trauma kit, stripped his soaking trousers, noting the tactical blade sheathed at his thigh with a nurse's deliberate, unflustered calm, and piled every blanket she owned over him. She dragged the space heater from the upstairs hallway and aimed it at his core. 3:14 a.m. She sat on the edge of her coffee table with a cup of coffee she forgot to drink and watched him breathe. The wind hit the windows in irregular, violent bursts. The street light outside had given up entirely. The neighborhood was buried, invisible, silent. There was not another human being within reach of her voice. She had moved the Kimber to her kitchen counter. She had not called 911. She couldn't explain the second decision with the same clean logic she could the first. The wound needed packing. The hypothermia needed addressing. The gun needed to be out of his immediate reach. Those were clinical, sequential, defensible. Not calling the police was something else. It lived in the same part of her brain where she stored the memory of her mother collapsing in their apartment kitchen when Serafina was 11, and the paramedics arriving 7 minutes too late, and the specific, permanent way that experience had shaped her relationship to the question of who you called when someone was dying in front of you. You called yourself. You did the work. Everything else came after. Around 4:30 a.m., the fever broke wrong, not down, but up. His temperature spiked into dangerous territory and he began to move, weakly, restlessly, his head turning side to side under the blankets with the unfocused agitation of delirium. Serafina knelt beside him with a cool cloth and pressed it gently to his forehead. "Non toccarmi," he muttered. "Don't touch me." His Italian was fluid and unconscious, the accent a sharp northern Italian clip that had been smoothed by years of American living but never fully erased. "You're safe," she said quietly. The same voice she'd used on the terrified pediatric patients. Calm. Real. No false promises, just presence. "You're inside. You're warm. Just rest." His chest heaved. "Il molo," he rasped. "The pier. Brucia tutto. Tutto. Burn it all." Serafina's hand went still on his forehead. The news had been running a segment on the drive home, she'd caught it fragmented between weather alerts, about a warehouse fire near Navy Pier. Dramatic footage of black smoke rising against the blizzard clouds. The anchor calling it an electrical failure. An electrical failure. The man thrashing on her rug had ordered it burned himself. Before she could process that, his eyes shot open, entirely white with fever, completely blind to her, and his hand found her throat. Not squeezing. Holding. The distinction mattered, and she noted it with clinical precision even as her heart rate spiked to 130. "Davi Louis? Where is he? Where is Marchetti?" "I don't know anyone named Marchetti." She kept her voice level. Steady. The same register she used with patients who woke from anesthesia swinging. "You're in Evanston. You were shot. I am a nurse. Let go of my throat." His eyes focused slowly, like a lens adjusting. The grip dropped. He said one word before the fever pulled him back under. "Troppo vicino." Too close. She went through his code at 5 a.m., telling herself she needed his blood type. She found what she found. A black card with no name. A satellite phone, encrypted, the screen locked behind a biometric system that wouldn't yield to her thumb. A roll of hundreds held together by a silver clip bearing a small engraved wolf's head. And a wallet. The license said Dario Ferrante. Clean construction. Perfect lamination. The photograph was undeniably him, sharp jaw, hollowed cheeks, that particular quality of stillness in the eyes that photographs usually couldn't capture, and this one somehow had. The name was fiction. But she'd recognized the tattoo. She sat back on her heels, coffee growing cold beside her, and looked at the unconscious man wrapped in her grandmother's quilt. The reclusive new head of the Costello syndicate was named, according to every whispered account she'd ever come across, Damiano. Damiano Costello. He had taken control after a period the Tribune called, in the careful, litigation-proof language of respectable journalism, a period of significant internal restructuring that had left 7 men dead and the entire Chicago waterfront under new management. She had dragged him in out of the cold. She had packed his wound with her own hands. She had held his throat and told him he was safe. Santa Madonna. He was awake at 6:17 a.m. The storm had begun, very slightly, to exhaust itself, the wind dropping from a roar to a moan, the snow thinning from blinding to merely heavy. Pale winter light was beginning to seep through the blinds, and Serafina was dozing in the armchair when the sound of movement snapped her instantly upright. Damiano Costello had pushed himself to sitting against the base of her sofa. The blankets were around his waist. The 4-line she'd improvised was still in his arm. The bandages at his side were clean, no fresh seep, which meant the packing had held. His color was still poor, skin carrying the grayish cast of significant blood loss, but his eyes were entirely, terrifyingly clear. He was holding the satellite phone. He'd retrieved it from the pile of his ruined clothes without making a sound. He was typing. "You didn't call the police," he said. His voice was low and complete, a baritone that filled the room without effort, the way a well-built instrument fills a concert hall. He didn't look up from the phone. "You told me not to," Serafina said. She stood, smoothed her scrubs, crossed her arms. "I make it a habit not to argue with armed men who are bleeding to death." His gaze moved to the kitchen counter. To his gun. Back to her. Something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile. The ghost of one. Gone before it arrived. You have steady hands, he said. Occupational requirement. You saved my life. He said it the way someone else might say you passed the salt. Factual. Acknowledged. Logged. You needed saving. She moved closer, checked the bandage with 2 efficient fingers without asking his permission. He watched her do it. You still need a proper surgical suite, a blood transfusion, and 48 hours of monitored recovery. What you don't need is. I know what I don't need. He hit send on the phone. Set it down. Looked at her with his full, unbroken attention in a way that was so complete it was almost physical. What I need is for you to listen to me for the next 60 seconds without interrupting. She opened her mouth. Per favor, he added. Soft. An addition, not a capitulation. She closed her mouth. Last night was a coup, Damiano said. Men inside my organization, men I put in position, men I trusted, tried to remove me permanently. They failed, as you can see. But they will be looking for me. My vehicle went down on Ridge Avenue, 2 blocks from this street. There is a blood trail from the crash site to your porch that a first-year detective could follow. He paused. Let that land. I have just sent my location to the one man in my organization I'm certain wasn't involved. He will be here within the hour. Serafina stared at him. You sent people here. To retrieve me? Yes. To my house? Yes. She stepped back. Then I want you gone before they arrive. I want every trace of you out of my house, and then I want. The men who shot me, Damiano said quietly, cutting through her sentence like it wasn't there, have access to the city's Halo camera network. Every street camera, every traffic feed, every retail exterior lens in a 3-mile radius. They will have already mapped the blood trail. They will have cross-referenced it with property records. They know someone on this street brought me inside. He looked at her steadily. They will be here by 8 a.m. regardless. The question is whether my people arrive first. The room was very quiet. You're saying, Serafina said slowly, that I'm in danger. I'm saying, Damiano replied, that you were in danger the moment you chose to drag me over that threshold instead of locking your door. I did not ask you to make that choice. But you made it. And now it has consequences. He held her gaze. I protect what I'm responsible for. Right now, whether you want it or not, that includes you. I am not, she said, very clearly, yours. No, he agreed. But your safety is my debt. And in my world, debts are absolute. Before she could answer, she felt it. A vibration. Not sound. Vibration. The kind that travels through foundations. Through floors. Through the soles of her feet. Then the sound arrived. Engines. Multiple. Deep register, high torque, the kind of mechanical rumble that didn't belong on a residential street at dawn, the kind you felt in your back teeth before your ears registered it. Growing louder, closer, until it seemed to surround the entire building. Car doors. Slamming in unison. Boots on her porch. Serafina stood frozen in the center of her living room, staring at her front door. Don't touch those blinds, Damiano said. Sharp. Immediate. The knock, when it came, was 3 beats. Precise. Measured. Damiano let out a slow breath. Open it. The man on her porch was named Enzo Ricci. She learned that later. In the moment, she registered, 6'2", former military posture, tailored navy coat, discreet earpiece, and eyes that took in the blood-stained rug and her trauma supplies with the neutral efficiency of a man who had seen significantly worse and hadn't lost sleep over it. Behind him, through the open door, her quiet Evanston Street had become something else entirely. 50 blacked-out Cadillac Escalades and Mercedes G-Wagons had formed a perimeter that stretched the length of the block in both directions. Men in tactical vests, no insignia, no badges, stood in the deep snow with assault rifles at low ready, their formation clean and professional and completely, silently terrifying. Capo, Enzo said, moving past Serafina without acknowledging her, dropping to one knee beside Damiano. Medical transport is staged. We have a clean route to signature flight support. Private strip, no TSA contact. Casualties, Damiano said. 3 at the pier. Enzo's voice didn't change. The hit was coordinated. They jammed comms with military-grade equipment and used telemetric tracking software to locate your vehicle before the ambush. Someone fed them your security protocols from the inside. A silence. Brief. Absolute. Leonello, Damiano said. Not a question. The name fell from his mouth like something he'd been holding for a long time and had finally put down. Enzo didn't react. Which was, Serafina understood, its own kind of confirmation. Your brother's consigliere, Enzo confirmed. Mio fratello, Damiano said. My brother. The words were very quiet and entirely without inflection, which was somehow the most frightening thing she had heard all night. Silvano planned this. We believe so, sir. 2 other men had entered behind Enzo, silent, efficient, already working. One was collecting every piece of used medical packaging from the floor. The other was applying what appeared to be a chemical solvent to the bloodstains on the hardwood, moving systematically, erasing the evidence of the night with the calm routine of men who had done this before. I need to leave, Serafina said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. You have your people, you have your transport. I appreciate that you're not dead, but I need you to take your convoy and your crisis and get out of my house. Damiano looked at her. It was the look, she would understand later, that meant he was deciding something. That the machinery behind his eyes was running and the output would be final. Enzo, he said, not looking away from her face, did Silvano's people access the city camera network? Full grid. Yes, sir. Then they have footage of this address. He finally looked at Enzo. If we leave her here, how long? Enzo's expression didn't move. 40 minutes. Maybe less. Serafina's chest went cold in a way that had nothing to do with the residual temperature of the night. The Evanston police have a mutual aid agreement with CPD, Damiano said to her. The deputy commissioner is on my brother's payroll. Has been for 4 years. The men coming for this address won't be wearing badges, but they'll have clearance to operate. If you call 911, the response will be delayed long enough to be irrelevant. You're lying, she said. Her voice didn't shake. She was proud of that. Enzo, Damiano said. Enzo held out his phone. A news article, pulled up, dated 3 months ago, Tribune investigation, buried on page 14, about a federal inquiry into CPD brass and their ties to organized crime through a series of shell corporations. She recognized the deputy commissioner's name from a community town hall she'd attended about ER funding. She'd thought he seemed reasonable. 3 minutes, Damiano said quietly. Pack what you need. Whatever you can carry. Because if you stay here, Kara, I cannot protect you. I am not your Kara, she snapped. Then pack your baggage yourself, he said. But pack it fast. She took 4 minutes. Jeans, 3 sweaters, warm socks, her heaviest parka. Her passport, some instinct buried below rational thought, from the nightstand. Her nursing license from the folder in the desk. Her grandmother's small gold crucifix from the jewelry dish on the dresser, because she was Italian and superstitious and some things you just did without knowing why. She came back downstairs to find the living room nearly restored, the blankets folded, the medical waste bagged and removed, the hardwood still damp where it had been treated. If you didn't know, you might not know. 2 men were standing at her door. Enzo had Damiano upright, one arm supporting him, the foreline carefully looped around Damiano's forearm where it wouldn't pull. Andiamo, Enzo said. Let's go. The cold hit her like a wall when they stepped outside. The convoy was arranged with the precision of a military extraction. An armored Escalade pulled directly to the foot of her walk. The rear door opened from inside. Enzo moved Damiano toward it with practiced efficiency, and Serafina stood on her own porch in the thin morning light, her duffel bag over one shoulder, and looked at her street. Her neighbor Juliana was watching from her upstairs window, phone in hand, expression unreadable through the glass. Serafina wanted to wave. To say something normal. To exist, for one more second, in the life she'd had yesterday. Ms. Mancuso, Enzo said behind her. Not unkind. Just final. She got in the car. The Bombardier Global 7500 climbed through the storm at a rate that felt, to Serafina's ground-level sensibilities, nearly violent, a steep, aggressive ascent that punched through the cloud layer and emerged suddenly into a sky so shockingly clear and blue it looked manufactured. The cabin was cream leather and mahogany trim and ambient lighting calibrated to be soothing, which Serafina found irritating. She was not in the mood to be soothed. She sat on a sofa in the aft section and watched a man introduced only as Dr. Eduardo Sterling, compact, precise, speaking to Damiano in the clipped technical shorthand of a physician who had been in unconventional medical situations before, finished securing a proper fore and checking the wound packing she'd placed. He replaced 2 of her bandages. Left the rest. He looked at her once when he thought she wasn't watching, with an expression she'd seen on colleagues when they reviewed a difficult field repair and found it competent. It didn't quite become a nod, but it was close. When Damiano dismissed him with a look, Sterling retreated forward without a word, sliding the partition shut behind him. Serafina and Damiano Costello were alone at 45,000 feet above the earth. Jackson Hole, he said, without preamble. She'd been about to speak. She closed her mouth, reset. That's where we're going. A private property. 140 acres, off-grid, full security infrastructure. My brother's network, federal and private, doesn't have record of it. How long? Until I know it's safe for you to return. I have a job. I'll have someone contact Northwestern Memorial with a family emergency. That is not, she stopped. Breathed. Started again. That is not your decision to make. No, he agreed. And I apologize for the necessity. But it is the decision I'm making. She stared at him. He looked back at her with that complete, unreadable attention that had been unsettling her since his eyes opened on her porch steps. There was nothing performing in it, no attempt to charm, no attempt to intimidate. Just evaluation. Seeing her. It was, she realized uncomfortably, the most seen she'd felt in a long time. What happens to me in Jackson Hole? She asked. You have full access to the estate. Staff will accommodate whatever you need. You aren't a prisoner. But I can't leave. Not safely. No. So I'm a guest who can't leave. That's a hostage, Mr. Costello. That's a complication, he said. There's a difference. She almost laughed. Not because it was funny. And what am I to you when this is over? When your brother is handled and the war is won or lost and the political landscape of Chicago reorganizes itself around whoever's left standing, what happens to Serafina Mancuso, who has seen your face and packed your wounds and heard your delirious fever confessions? He was quiet for a moment. I owe you a life, he said finally. In my world, that's not a small thing. In my world, she said, it sounds like the kind of thing people say right before they tie up loose ends. Something moved across his face. Too fast to name. He reached into the pocket of the fresh trousers his men had provided and removed the kimber, held it sideways, pointed at nothing, and with practiced ease popped the magazine, then used his thumbnail to release a false plate at the base of the clip. A micro SD card, no bigger than a fingernail, fell onto the table between them. The Navy Pier warehouse fire, he said. Silvano arranged it. He thought he was destroying financial records, the shipping ledgers, the offshore accounts, the trail linking him to 3 sitting aldermen and a federal judge and a narcotics pipeline running from Sonora through the port of Chicago and into every major city in the Midwest. Serafina looked at the card. He didn't know I'd already downloaded a full copy, Damiano continued. He doesn't know this exists. Right now, this micro-SD is the entire criminal case against the Silvano faction, against their political infrastructure, against the cartel contacts. It's enough to indict 27 people. Then give it to the FBI. The regional SACS office has 2 informants inside it who are on Silvano's payroll. The moment I contact them, the card disappears and I'm the next casualty of whatever accident my brother chooses to arrange. He looked at her steadily. I have one contact. One federal prosecutor who has been building an independent case for 6 years and who has agreed, through back channels, to receive this evidence through an untraceable path. Getting it to her requires time I don't currently have, and a chain of custody that can't be traced back to me. And where does that leave me? It leaves you as the only person outside my organization who knows this card exists. He picked it up. You didn't just save my life on that porch. You saved the only instrument capable of ending my brother's reign without a protracted war that will kill considerably more people. Serafina looked at the tiny piece of plastic in his fingers. You're telling me this, she said slowly, because you want me to understand the stakes. You're telling me this because you need me to choose to stay. His jaw tightened. I'm telling you this because you deserve to know why your life is in danger. And because, he paused. It was the first hesitation she'd heard from him. Brief, almost imperceptible. Because you chose to save me without knowing any of it. That deserves honesty in return. The plane shifted, banking slightly as it began its long arc west. Serafina sat with that for a moment. I despise you, she said. That seems reasonable, Damiano replied. I want to be very clear about that. You have upended my life, removed me from my home, and are transporting me to a location I've never visited because of choices you made that had nothing to do with me. Yes. And I still, she said, want to kill you a little bit for sending that location signal before I even knew what was happening. Also reasonable, he said. And this time, the almost smile arrived and stayed for a full second before it left. You already know she should have locked that door. But the part of you that kept watching knows exactly why she didn't. Subscribe. Stay. The estate outside Jackson Hole materialized out of the Wyoming darkness like something someone had described in a dream and then actually built. Stone and timber and glass, massive but not ostentatious, designed to be consumed by its landscape rather than imposed upon it, set back from a private road behind a gate system that Enzo passed through using 3 separate authentication steps. The mountain range behind it was sharp and white against the night sky, and the air was a different kind of cold than Chicago cold, drier, cleaner, easier to breathe. There were 12 staff members on property. Serafina counted them in the first hour, not because she was suspicious but because counting things was how she managed environments she didn't control. A housekeeper named Rosaria. A cook. For security personnel who moved in rotations she mapped within 2 days. A groundskeeper. Others. She was given a suite in the east wing, private bath, a view of the mountains, heavy wool blankets, books on the shelves that ranged from Umberto Eco to financial case law to a battered Agatha Christie paperback that felt, somehow, like the most human thing she'd encountered in the building. She chose the Agatha Christie. Damiano was confined to bed for 72 hours on Dr. Sterling's direct orders. Serafina was not confined to anything but she found herself checking on him, twice the first day, because she was a nurse and those were her bandages and she wanted to know they were holding. The first time, he was asleep. The second time, he was awake and reading a document on a tablet that he angled away from her when she entered, a gesture so automatic it clearly wasn't about her specifically. Bandages, she said. He set the tablet down. Go ahead. She pulled the dressing, checked the wound, clean edges, good color, no heat. The packing was doing its job. She replaced the bandage with fresh supplies from the estate's medical kit, her movements efficient and impersonal. You're good at that, he said. I know. You don't like compliments. I like accurate information. That was accurate information. She smoothed the last piece of tape. Why nursing? She hadn't meant to ask. It came out anyway. Why nursing? She repeated, clarifying. Not, why did I choose nursing? Why does someone like you have a doctor on retainer but still register that I smelled like iodine and latex when you were half dead on my stairs? Why does it matter to you what I do? He was quiet for a moment. Then, my mother died in a hospital corridor. She was waiting for a bed. Nurses kept walking past. Nobody stopped. His voice was entirely even. She had a pulmonary embolism. It took 11 minutes from the onset of symptoms to when someone finally stopped. By then it had been 9 minutes too long. Serafina's hands went still. I was 19, Damiano said. I was already deep in the family work. I had already done things. A pause. He looked at his hands, then back at her. Things that couldn't be undone. But I've never forgotten that. That someone should have stopped. And didn't. I'm sorry, she said. Don't be sorry. Just keep being someone who stops. He picked the tablet back up. The wound feels better. Thank you. She stood to leave. Serafina. She stopped. There's a library on the ground floor. Second door on the left. It has better books than whatever's in your room. She didn't answer. But the next morning she found the library, and the Italo Calvino collection on the third shelf was, in fact, considerably better. On the fourth day, a man named Nico Caruso arrived. He came in a single car, unannounced, through the gate with a code that Enzo, who met him at the door with the particular stillness of a man keeping something managed, clearly hadn't been expecting him to have. Caruso was 40-something, heavy through the shoulders, with the carefully maintained tan of a man who spent time in places where winter didn't apply. He wore a gold ring on his right hand that bore the same wolf and serpent crest as Damiano's tattoo, but slightly different, subordinate in some way she couldn't articulate but felt. He was, she overheard from the hallway she probably shouldn't have been standing in, the consigliere of the Caruso faction, a satellite family that had been allied with the Costellos for 2 generations, and whose current allegiance was, Enzo's voice made clear, somewhat in question. Serafina backed away from the hallway. She went to the library. She sat with the Calvino and did not read a single word. She was thinking about the conversation she'd had with Damiano the night before, in the kitchen at midnight when she couldn't sleep and he'd appeared in the doorway looking significantly better than a man who'd been shot 4 days ago had any medical right to look, and asked her if she wanted coffee because he was making some. And they had sat at a kitchen island the size of a small boat and argued, mildly but sincerely, about whether the city of Chicago was actually governable or structurally designed to produce exactly the kind of corrupt machine it kept claiming to be fighting. He had opinions. Real ones. Not performance positions but actual analytical frameworks, built from 16 years of operating inside the infrastructure most people only read about. She had opinions too. Neither of them won the argument. They both knew more than the other about different parts of the same thing, and the conversation had died not because it ran out of material but because it was 2 a.m. and they both suddenly registered, simultaneously, that they had been talking for an hour and a half. He had looked at her across the kitchen island with that gray, evaluating gaze, and she had felt something shift in the room that had nothing to do with the temperature. She had said goodnight very quickly and gone upstairs. She was still not sure that had been the right call. Caruso stayed for 3 hours. She didn't know what was decided. She knew that when he left, Enzo came to find her in the library and said, "The Don would like to speak with you. In the study, when you have a moment." "Tell the Don," Serafina said, turning a page she hadn't read, "that I'll be there when I'm ready." Enzo departed without blinking. She waited 12 minutes, then went to the study. "If you're still here, and you are, because you felt that kitchen scene in your chest, you already understand that this isn't a story about a mob boss and a nurse. It's a story about 2 people who were built for impossible circumstances suddenly, catastrophically, finding each other inside one. She keeps saving him. He keeps realizing it. Subscribe. Because the most dangerous moment in this story hasn't happened yet. The study smelled like good coffee and old paper and something underneath both of those things, cedar, maybe, or vetiver, that Serafina had already unconsciously begun to associate with him, which she noted with the clinical detachment of a woman who knew exactly what she was doing and was choosing not to examine it in real time. Damiano was standing at the window. He turned when she entered. He looked, for the first time since she'd met him bleeding on her steps, like himself in full, dressed properly, the wound no longer visibly compromising his movement, the fever color gone from his face. He looked, she thought with some irritation, extraordinarily composed for a man conducting a civil war from a mountain hideout. Caruso's family, he said, is going to stay neutral. Is that good or bad? Both. It means Silvano doesn't get their support. It also means I have to take down his operation without the Caruso firepower I was counting on. He turned from the window. Which changes the timeline. And why does this involve me? Because the federal prosecutor I mentioned, Anita Doyle, is in Chicago. She's agreed to the evidence handoff, but it has to be in person, untraceable, and through someone who isn't me. He held her gaze. Through someone Silvano's people have no record of and no reason to watch. The room was very quiet. No, Serafina said. Serafina. No. She took a step forward. No. You want me to carry that micro SD card into Chicago and hand it to a federal prosecutor while your brother's mercenaries are still running surveillance on the city? That is not, she caught herself. Controlled her voice. That is not a thing I can do. I am a trauma nurse. I don't run packages for criminal organizations. I'm asking you to end one, Damiano said. Silence. Anita Doyle's office has been building toward this for 6 years. The moment she receives this evidence, she can move on Silvano's political infrastructure within 72 hours. Grand jury convenes within the week. The mercenary contracts disappear because there's no one left to fund them. The threat to you, to your home, to your life, ends. He paused. Not diminishes. Ends. And what about the threat from you? It landed harder than she intended. Or maybe exactly as hard as she intended. Damiano didn't flinch. But something, some nearly invisible thing, moved through his eyes. When this is over, he said, you go back to your life. Your job, your house, your routines. I have Rosaria arrange cleaning services for the damage. I arrange for your nursing board record to show the family emergency leave without penalty. I ensure Northwestern Memorial holds your position. He paused. I disappear from your life completely, if that's what you want. And if it's not? She hadn't planned to say that either. The silence between them was different now. Heavier. The kind that accumulated rather than dissipated. Then we have a conversation, Damiano said carefully, that is not appropriate to have while I'm still asking you to do something dangerous for me. She looked at him for a long moment. He looked back. I'm going to need, she said finally, an extremely good cover story, a clean phone, and someone to tell me exactly how Anita Doyle takes her coffee because I am not walking into a federal prosecutor's office cold. Damiano's chest moved. A breath, released. She drinks it black, he said. With a single sugar. Of course she does, Serafina muttered. He trained her for 3 days. That was perhaps not the right word. Briefed her. Walked her through the operational parameters with the same patient, methodical precision she used when training new nursing graduates, building the framework first, then the variables, then the contingencies. He sat across from her at the kitchen island or in the library or at the long dinner table where they increasingly ended up eating together because the formality of separate arrangements had quietly dissolved without either of them addressing it, and he explained. How to enter the federal building. Which entrance, which time, which security checkpoint. The specific phrase Anita Doyle would use to confirm identity. The secondary phrase Serafina would use in response. The location of the SD card, in the sealed lining of a new phone case he provided, slotted against the back panel where it would pass a casual scan. She asked good questions. He noticed. He noticed everything about her, with an attention that had initially been surveillance and was now something he couldn't call by that name without lying to himself. On the second night of the training sessions, she fell asleep in the library. Not dramatically, just went quiet mid-sentence while he was explaining Doyle's communication protocols, and when he looked up she was sideways on the leather sofa, her cheek on the armrest, her breath evening out. He should have woken her. He found a blanket from the chest in the corner. He placed it over her with the particular carefulness of a man who was unaccustomed to being careful about anything. He went to bed 3 hours later than he needed to. He told himself he'd been reviewing documents. On the third night, Silvano found them. Not the estate, the perimeter sensors didn't trip, and Enzo's rotation held. But at 11:47 p.m., Damiano's encrypted tablet showed an incoming file from an unknown routing address that resolved, when Enzo's security tech cracked the source code, to a server registered to one of Silvano's shell companies. It was a video. Serafina's townhouse on Greenleaf Avenue. Interior footage, from a camera that had been installed, she realized with nausea, before that night, before the blizzard, before any of this. Footage of her living room. Her kitchen. Her hallway. And a message, in Italian. Enzo translated it with the flat, professional effect of a man who had delivered bad news before and had long since learned that effect was a kindness. She can't stay hidden with you forever, brother. Send her home. Let me speak with her. Or I will stop being this polite. The room was very quiet. Damiano looked at the tablet for a long time. Then he said, with absolute stillness, "Get me a secure line to Luca Ferry." Enzo nodded and left. Serafina sat in the chair across from him. She had been present for the translation. She had watched his face through it, the stillness, the calculation, the moment where something extremely cold moved through his eyes and settled. "He had my house surveilled," she said. "Yes. Before any of this happened. He already knew where I lived. My family's intelligence operation has eyes on most of the city," Damiano said quietly. "Including the neighborhoods proximate to our operating routes. Greenleaf Avenue runs parallel to Ridge, where my car went down. He would have known the neighborhood." He looked at her. "I don't know how long the camera had been there." She absorbed that. "So when he says he wants to speak with me, he wants to know what you saw. What you heard. What I told you." Damiano set the tablet down. "He won't find this estate. But he's now making clear that waiting isn't neutral for him. He's moving up his timeline. Which means we move up ours." He looked at her. "Chicago," she said. "The handoff. When?" "Doyle can arrange a window in 48 hours. But the risk level." "Tell me the risk level and let me decide," she said. "You keep making decisions about my life for me. I'm asking you, right now, to brief me honestly and let me choose." A long pause. "The risk," Damiano said, "is moderate. Silvano's surveillance on federal buildings is focused on entrances I previously used. He won't be watching for you. The phone case will pass security. Doyle's team is small and contained. The window of exposure is approximately 4 minutes. He paused. "But if something goes wrong?" "If something goes wrong," Serafina said, "I'm a nurse who went to a federal building to report a safety concern. I know nothing. I saw nothing. I'm a woman who found a man in the snow and made a mistake." She held his gaze. "I've been a woman who made a mistake before. I'm good at surviving that." Something crossed his face. Pain, almost. Not physical. "I don't want you to have to be," he said quietly. The air in the room changed. She was aware of the distance between them, the coffee table, maybe 3 feet. Aware of the way he was looking at her, which had long since stopped being the evaluation of a man cataloging assets and started being something considerably more inconvenient. "Damiano," she said. "Don't," he said. "I haven't said anything." "I know what you were going to say." "I was going to say," she said carefully, "that whatever this is, Between us, in this room, which I refuse to pretend doesn't exist because pretending things don't exist has never served me well, it needs to wait until this is over. He looked at her for a long moment. Yes, he said. It does. I am not, she added, agreeing to anything by acknowledging that it exists. No. And I still think you're the most arrogant, high-handed, presumptuous person I've ever had the misfortune of meeting. Anch'io respeto, he said. I respect you too. She picked up her coffee. She was smiling. She refused to let him see it. But she was smiling. The plan was clean. Serafina would fly commercially from Jackson Hole to O'Hare, civilian ticket, her own name, no connection to Damiano, and take the Blue Line to Federal Plaza. She would request to speak with Anita Doyle's office using a specific case reference number that Doyle's team had established as an authentication signal. She would be taken to a side office. She would have 4 minutes. Then she would leave. Take a different train. Go to a hotel in Lincoln Park that Enzo had booked under a guest name. Wait for Enzo's call confirming the evidence had been authenticated. Then she could go home. It was clean. It did not stay clean. She boarded the Blue Line at O'Hare at 11:15 a.m. At 11:31 a.m., at the Clark/Lake stop, a man sat down directly across from her. He wore a dark overcoat. He had a compact build, the kind that was easy to overlook until you noticed the way his hands rested in his lap. Still. Too still. The way someone trained to wait. He didn't look at her directly. He looked at his phone. But at Jackson Boulevard, 2 stops before hers, he looked up. And for exactly 1 second, his eyes went to the phone case in her hand, the one with the card, and then to her face. He knew. Serafina stood up 3 seconds before her stop, moved toward the doors, and stepped off at Washington without running. She did not run. Running was information. She walked at the pace of a person who had somewhere to be but was not afraid, which required a level of performance she hadn't known she was capable of. She moved up the escalator, through the turnstile, onto Dearborn Street. She didn't look back. She walked 2 blocks north, ducked into a coffee shop, found the restroom in the back, locked the door, and stood with her back against it in the small, fluorescent-lit space, breathing. She called the number Damiano had given her for emergencies only. He picked up on the first ring. There's someone on me, she said quietly. Overcoat. Compact build. He clocked the case. Silence for 3 seconds. Are you inside somewhere? Coffee shop bathroom. Washington and Dearborn. Stay there. Don't move. His voice was completely even. She recognized it, the same register he'd used on her porch in the snow, when he was bleeding and giving her orders, and she'd obeyed them because the authority in his voice was so total it bypassed ordinary skepticism. Enzo has a 2-man team 12 minutes out. I need you to. I'm not waiting 12 minutes, she said. Serafina. Federal Plaza is 4 blocks from here. If I go now, straight there, I can be through security before whoever that was makes contact with whoever's running him. She paused. 4 minutes in the building. I can outrun 12 minutes of response time. The risk is. Tell me a better option. He didn't. Go, he said. It was the hardest sounding simple word she'd ever heard. Like he was having to force it. Fast. Don't stop. I know how to move through a city. I know you do. A pause. Serafina. What? Stay attenta. Be careful. She unlocked the bathroom door and walked out. She covered the 4 blocks in 6 minutes. The man in the overcoat did not reappear. Security at Federal Plaza was exactly as Damiano had described, the line, the checkpoint, the specific officer stationed at the left-hand desk who had been, through some chain of arrangements she couldn't trace and didn't want to, pre-briefed on the case reference number. 4 minutes. Anita Doyle was 51, silver-haired, and dressed with the deliberate plainness of a woman who wanted to be underestimated by people who hadn't read her record. She met Serafina in a side office with a frosted glass door and no nameplate and accepted the phone case with both hands and set it on the desk between them. "You're not who I expected," Doyle said. "No," Serafina agreed. "Are you all right?" It was an unexpected question. The kind you could only answer honestly. "I will be," Serafina said. Doyle looked at her for a moment. Then she picked up the phone case, applied gentle pressure along the back panel, and the SD card slid free into her palm. "Tell him," Doyle said, "that the next move is mine." "I'll tell him," Serafina said. She left. The hotel in Lincoln Park was quiet. She sat on the bed and called Damiano. "Done," she said. 3 seconds of silence. "You're safe?" "I'm in the room. The man on the train didn't follow me in." "He didn't," Damiano confirmed. "Enzo's team picked him up outside the station. He was a freelance surveillance contractor. He's been," a pause that she chose not to interpret. "He's no longer a concern." She understood what the pause meant. She chose not to examine how little she felt about it. "What happens now?" she said. "Doyle moves within 48 hours. The grand jury convenes under seal. Silvano's political infrastructure collapses before he can react, the alderman, the deputy commissioner, the federal contacts. Without that protection, his mercenary contracts are voided." A pause. "Without funding and without protection, Silvano is exposed." "And you handle Silvano?" "Yes." "What does handle mean?" Silence. "Does he live?" she asked directly. "That depends," Damiano said, "on whether he makes a choice I'm giving him the option to make." It wasn't a clean answer. It wasn't meant to be. "I'm not going to ask you to be someone you're not," she said. "But I am going to ask you to remember, when you're making that decision, that whatever you do, you have to live with it. And that matters. Even in your world. Especially in your world." A long pause. "See," he said quietly. "Yes. Lo so. I know. I'm going home tomorrow," she said. "I know. Enzo will arrange. I'll arrange my own ride." "Serafina." "I'm going home," she said firmly, "in a cab, like a person. I will text you when I arrive so you know I'm safe, because that seems like the kind of thing we're doing now. And then I'm going to sleep for approximately 14 hours. Another pause. And then, very quietly, "Grazie. Not for the evidence run." She understood that. For something older. Bigger. Something that started on a porch in a blizzard when she made a choice she couldn't quite explain. "You're welcome," she said. "Damiano." She heard him exhale. She hung up first. She made a point of it. She was asleep in the hotel when the text came. Not from Damiano. Not from Enzo. From a number she didn't recognize, no area code, the kind of routing that suggested it had passed through several systems to arrive. The message was a name. Loretta Costello. And beneath it, "She's been at Northwestern Memorial for 72 hours. Room 4C. She asked for you by name. She says she found you the same way her son found you, by following the trail." Serafina sat up in the dark hotel room, her heart already moving faster than sleep could explain. She typed back, "Who is this?" The reply came in seconds. "Doyle. Don't call him yet. Read the file I'm sending first." The file arrived 30 seconds later. She read it on the dim screen of her phone, sitting cross-legged on the hotel bed at 2 a.m., and the world rebuilt itself around her while she read. Loretta Costello was not dead. The story of her death, in a hospital corridor, from a pulmonary embolism, while nurses walked past, was real. Loretta had nearly died. She had coded in that corridor at 19 minutes, and the recovery had been long and uncertain and had left her with lasting cardiac damage. but she had lived. And when she recovered, she had done what a woman of extraordinary pragmatic intelligence in an impossible position sometimes does. She had disappeared. Not into witness protection, not into hiding, not into anything that required cooperation with authorities who had been, at various points over the preceding decade, on her husband's payroll. She had simply left. With nothing, no money, no contacts, no Costello name. Into a quiet life in a suburb of Milwaukee, under a different surname, where she had spent 11 years working as a hospital administrator for a community medical center and, it appeared, building a careful, meticulous record of everything she had seen and known during 22 years as the wife of the Costello patriarch. A record that had been quietly submitted to Anita Doyle's office 3 years ago. A record that had been the foundation of the very case Doyle was now in a position to close. Serafina scrolled to the last page of the file. Loretta had found her son. Not recently, in the last 6 months, carefully, through back channels that didn't leave records. She had been watching. She had known about Silvano's coup before it happened. She had been the one who tipped an anonymous source in Doyle's office about the timing. And she had been admitted to Northwestern Memorial 3 days ago with a cardiac episode, legitimate, not manufactured, that had put her in moderate danger. She was stable now. But she had asked for Serafina by name. The last line of Doyle's message said, "She found your name in her son's things." He wrote it down. Just your name, your hospital, and the date. Serafina stared at that. He had written her name down. Before the run to Federal Plaza. Before the kitchen conversations. Before the blanket in the library. He had written her name down like someone noting something precious enough to need a record. She sat with that for a full minute. Then she called him. He answered mid-first ring, which told her he hadn't been sleeping either. "Your mother is alive," she said. 4 seconds of complete silence. Serafina. "Your mother is alive, she is in room 4C at Northwestern Memorial, she is stable but needs cardiology follow-up, and she has been the source feeding Doyle's independent case for 3 years. She kept her voice even. Clinical. The way she was when she delivered news that was too large for normal speech. She faked her death to get out. She took her records with her. She's been waiting for a moment when the evidence would be enough. She heard him breathe. Just breathe. In and out. Once. Twice. "Madonna," he said finally. Barely a whisper. "I'm going to the hospital," Serafina said. "Tonight. Right now. She asked for me and she is a cardiac patient with no family contact registered and I am going." "Oh. You'll stay exactly where you are," she said. "Enzo will arrange something in 48 hours when Doyle's move has cleared and your brother's network is compromised. You cannot be in Chicago tonight." "She's my mother, Serafina." "I know." Her voice softened. "She couldn't help it. And she'll still be your mother in 48 hours. She waited 11 years. She can wait 2 more days." A pause. "I'll sit with her tonight. I'll tell her you're coming. I'll tell her," she stopped. "What do you want me to tell her?" The longest silence yet. "Tell her," Damiano said, his voice stripped of everything except the thing underneath it, "che la aspettavo. That I've been waiting for her." Loretta Costello was 63, small-boned, dark-eyed, and when Serafina walked into room 4C at 3:30 a.m. she was sitting up in bed with the particular upright composure of a woman who had chosen her own terms for a very long time and saw no reason to stop now. She looked at Serafina the way Damiano looked at things, with complete, evaluating attention. And then she said, in accented English that carried the same northern Italian clip as her son's, "You dragged him inside." "He was bleeding," Serafina said. Loretta looked at her for a moment. Then she made a small, decisive sound, not quite a laugh, not quite approval, but something between the two. "Siediti," she said. "Sit down." Serafina sat. They talked until dawn. Doyle moved in 41 hours. 7 simultaneous federal arrests, 3 aldermen, the CPD deputy commissioner, 2 members of a federal liaison office, and a shipping port authority official whose cooperation had been the linchpin of Silvano's narcotics route. 2 sitting state senators received subpoenas. A grand jury convened under seal at 9 a.m. on a Thursday and did not adjourn until the following evening. Damiano Costello was arrested at his Gold Coast penthouse at 6:17 a.m. on a Friday, still in his dressing gown, by a team of federal marshals who were not on anyone's payroll because Doyle had imported them from 3 different field offices for exactly that reason. He did not go quietly. But he went. The charges were extensive enough that his legal team's first meeting, by all accounts, lasted 6 hours and ended without a strategy. Damiano received the news in the study of the Jackson Hole estate, on a secure call from Enzo, with Serafina sitting in the chair across from him because she had driven back from Chicago the evening before and he had said, without preamble, "Stay for the news," and she had. When Enzo's voice finished, Damiano set the phone down on the desk. He sat with his hands flat on the mahogany surface and looked at them for a long time. "Is it done?" Serafina asked. "The federal case is done," he said. "The family restructuring will take months. There are decisions to make about the syndicate, what it becomes, what it doesn't." He paused. "I'm not going to pretend I'm walking away from all of it. That's not," he looked up. "That's not who I am. I know that's not simple." "No," she agreed. "It's not. But there are things I've already decided to end. The port operations that were tied to the cartel routes. 3 layers of political corruption that Silvano had built that I won't rebuild." He looked at her steadily. "It's not redemption. I know better than to use that word. But it's a choice. It's a starting point," she said. He nodded. Looked back at his hands. "My mother," he said. The words were careful. Like he was testing the weight of them. "She's going home to Milwaukee next week. The cardiology team at Northwestern wants her to see a specialist about the long-term mitral valve situation. I've spoken with Dr. Ewan in the cardiovascular department." She paused. "She wants to see you. She was very clear about that. She also wants you to know that she is not," Serafina almost smiled. Her words. "She is not interested in being managed or installed in a compound somewhere or surrounded by men with guns." Damiano's mouth curved. His first full, real smile. It changed his face entirely, younger, less calculated, something underneath the authority that was simply human. "She told me the same thing," he said. "This morning. In Italian. At length." "She's extraordinary," Serafina said. "Yes," he agreed. "She is." He looked at her. "She told me something about you." Serafina raised an eyebrow. "She said," he paused. Something almost uncertain moved through his expression, which was so unusual on his face it was its own kind of information. "La persona giusta arriva sempre nel momento sbagliato. Ma arriva." The right person always arrives at the wrong moment. But they arrive. The room was very quiet. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Wyoming mountains were sharp and white in the afternoon light. The sky was the impossible clear blue of high altitude. "That's very Italian of her," Serafina said. "It is," he agreed. "It's also," she said carefully, "a significant amount of pressure to place on a woman who was just trying to finish her shift and go to bed." "I know." His voice was quiet. "I'm not placing pressure on you. He stopped. Tried again. "I am not a man who asks for things. I don't have a framework for it. But I am asking you, not for the debt, not for the safety, not for anything that has to do with the last 2 weeks, to consider." He held her gaze. "Just consider." "Consider what, exactly?" she asked. Not to be difficult. Because she wanted him to say it. He looked at her across the desk in the mountain study, This man who had bled on her steps and woken up and claimed her safety like it was a natural right and shown her his mother's name like a wound he'd been carrying and written her name down on a piece of paper before he had any reason to. Tay, he said. You. Consider me. She went home on a Tuesday. Her own car, her own cab. Enzo drove her to the Jackson Hole Airport without comment and without weaponry, which she had specifically requested, and she flew commercial to O'Hare and took the Blue Line back to Evanston because she was a person who took the train and she was going to keep being that person. Her street was quiet. The front door had been replaced, new, heavier, same oak finish, seamlessly installed at some point in the preceding week by people she hadn't requested but probably should have anticipated. The living room was clean. Not cleaned, restored. The hardwood where the blood had soaked in was entirely refinished, same grain, same color. The rug was new but similar enough she almost didn't notice. On the kitchen counter, next to the coffee maker, was a single white envelope. Inside was a handwritten note on heavy cream paper. Not a letter. Not an explanation. 4 lines, in Italian. The debt is paid. The choice is yours. Whatever you decide. Ti sono grato. D. I am grateful to you. She stood in her kitchen in her coat, her bag still on her shoulder, and read it 3 times. Then she set it down, made coffee, and went upstairs to sleep. 3 weeks later. Northwestern Memorial, Trauma Bay, 11 p.m. on a Wednesday. The kind of shift where the cases arrived in clusters: a car accident, an overdose, a kitchen fire, a teenager who had taken too many of the wrong pills for reasons she was too young to be carrying. The work that never ended. The work she was built for. At midnight, she went to the break room. There was a man standing at the coffee machine who should not have been there. Not because he was dangerous, though he was, she knew that, she knew his file better than she knew some of her colleagues, but because he was in a federal building during active charges against his family name, in a public hospital, on a Wednesday night. He turned when she walked in. He looked better than he had any right to. Coat, no tie, the Patek Philippe replaced by something simpler. The wolf tattoo was covered. He looked, she thought, like a man making a deliberate effort to look like something other than what he was, and the effort was visible and somehow more convincing than the original. I had a meeting with Doyle's office today, he said. I'm cooperating with the restructuring investigation. In exchange for a reduced framework of ongoing obligations, they've agreed to a supervised exit from several of the syndicate operations. He paused. My lawyer is very unhappy with me. My consigliere, the one I can still trust, thinks I've lost my mind. Have you? She asked. Possibly, he said. I'm in a hospital break room at midnight. How did you get past security? I know the night supervisor. A pause. He's an old family connection. He lets me use the private elevator when I'm visiting my mother. Of course. She's here? Cardiology follow-up. Dr. Ewan. She's being very dramatic about the monitoring protocols. She's not being dramatic, Serafina said. The mitral valve situation is genuinely, she stopped. He was looking at her with that expression again. She changed direction. I'll go check on her after my shift. She'd like that. He paused. I'd like that. Serafina poured her coffee. Turned around and leaned against the counter. The envelope, she said. Ti sono grato. You're grateful. Past tense. Like the debt is closed. The debt is closed, Damiano said. Yes. And you're here anyway. Yes. In a hospital break room. Correcto. She looked at him for a long moment. He looked back at her, the same way he'd looked at her in the porch lamplight when his eyes first opened, with that total, undefended attention that had been unsettling her for weeks and that she had finally, some point during the 14 hours of sleep in her own bed after she came home, admitted she actively wanted pointed at her. I have 4 hours left in my shift, she said. I know. And then I have to be back here at 7 a.m. I know that too. You are, she said, still the most presumptuous person I have ever met. I know, he said. Not contrite. Just honest. Ma ekamika. But here I am. She took a sip of her coffee. There's a diner on Davis Street that opens at 5 a.m., she said. They make very good eggs. The coffee is mediocre, but they bring it in large cups, which compensates. Damiano was quiet for a moment. Then, I'll be outside at 5. You'll be inside, she said. At a table. Like a person. Not in an armored vehicle. One car, he said. Enzo drives. It's non-negotiable. Fine. One car. Enzo can order his own eggs. He'll want the toast. The toast is excellent, she agreed. He nodded. She turned back to the counter. She heard him move toward the door. Damiano, she said. He stopped. Your mother, she said, without turning around, told me that you used to read to her when you were small. Poetry. Leopardi. A long pause. She told you that. She did. She was very pleased about it. She is impossible, he said quietly. She's extraordinary, Serafina replied. Like I said. She heard him exhale, the same exhale she'd heard on the phone at 3 a.m. when she'd told him his mother was alive, the kind that sounds like something enormous, finally, being set down. 5 a.m., he said. 5 a.m., she confirmed. The door closed quietly behind him. Serafina stood in the break room with her mediocre hospital coffee and looked at the overhead light for a moment. Outside, Chicago was doing what Chicago did, surviving, grinding, glittering against the cold, carrying its history of violence and beauty and corruption and extraordinary human stubbornness forward into another night. Somewhere in this building, Loretta Costello was refusing to follow her doctor's monitoring protocols and being magnificent about it. Somewhere in the parking structure, a man who controlled the largest criminal syndicate on the Great Lakes was sitting in a car reading case law because his lawyer had asked him to, and was planning to be at a diner on Davis Street at 5 a.m. with eggs and good enough coffee and whatever came next. Serafina finished her coffee. She put her cup in the sink, smoothed her scrubs, and walked back to the trauma bay. She had 4 hours of work left. She knew how to do the work. Everything else, the debt, the danger, the war that had been fought in a blizzard and won with a micro SD card and a federal prosecutor who took her coffee black with a single sugar, all of it had settled into something she couldn't name yet. Not a scar. Not quite. Something older than a scar. The thing a scar becomes when it's healed long enough. Evidence. That something happened. That you survived it. That survival, sometimes, is the beginning. She stepped into the light of the trauma bay. She got to work. If this story found you, if some part of you recognized the woman on those steps, the choice she made before she had all the information, the way she held his throat and told him he was safe when she was terrified, then you understand that love doesn't always arrive announced. Sometimes it bleeds on your porch in a blizzard and grips your wrist and says no hospitals and changes every single thing. She didn't plan to save him. She planned to finish her shift. The most important choices we ever make are the ones we make before we know what they cost. If this story wrecked you the way it was supposed to, share it with someone who understands that some people don't come into your life gently. Subscribe, because more of these stories are coming, and they will find you when you need them. And if you want to know what Loretta whispered to Serafina in that hospital room at 4 a.m., when the city was quiet and the hard part was almost over, tell me in the comments. Because some conversations deserve an audience.